rain on the glass. 42 floors of it, running down the south face of Sloane Tower in long silver ropes, and below, the lobby waits in a hush of white marble and gold leaf. It is 9 minutes to 7 on a Thursday in October, and Nora Quinn is on her knees. She is working a black heel scuff out of the marble, the cloth moving in small, even circles, the way she does everything. Quiet, careful. Her cart stands behind her, gray plastic, one wheel that ticks when it turns. A name tag hangs crooked from her gray shirt. N. Quinn. Night crew. The elevator opens. Julian Sloane walks out of it the way money walks, without looking down. He is 56 and dressed in a suit that costs more than she earns in a season, and he is mid-sentence to the 3 people trailing behind him, all of them holding tablets, all of them nodding before he finishes a thought. He does not see her. That is the first thing. A man can be 6 feet from a person and not see her at all. His shoe finds the wet patch she has just cleaned. He slips, only a little, only the smallest loss of dignity, a hand thrown out to catch the air. But he is a man who has spent 30 years making sure no one ever sees him reach for balance, and now a janitor has seen it. So it has to become her fault. Are you out of your mind? His voice fills the marble. It is built for rooms like this. You leave a wet floor, no sign, no warning, the night before the most important event this company has ever held. Nora rises. She does not rush it. She stands the way she always stands, weight even, shoulders level, hands loose at her sides. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll put a sign out." "You'll put a sign out." He says it back to her slowly, tasting how small it is. He turns to his people. "She'll put a sign out." A laugh moves through them on cue. "Do you know what's happening here tomorrow night? Do you have the faintest idea?" She does. Everyone in the building knows. But she says, "No, sir," because that is the answer that ends things fastest, and ending things fast is its own kind of skill she has learned. 400 guests, the relaunch of a 100-year-old name, press from 9 countries. He steps closer. The cologne arrives before he does. And the Gala's centerpiece will be standing right there, on that floor, where you couldn't be bothered to keep a grown man from breaking his neck. He looks at her for the first time, really looks. And what he sees is a woman of 38 in a uniform 2 sizes too big, hair pulled back, a face that has stopped expecting much. He sees the bottom of the building. He decides she is furniture that talked back. "What's your name?" "Nora." "Your last name?" She tells him. He turns to the woman with the clipboard. "I want her gone before tomorrow. I don't want to see this on the floor when the cameras are here." He says it the way you'd ask someone to take out a bag of trash. Then, because cruelty is a performance and he has an audience, he adds, "People like you should be grateful there's a floor to clean. Try to remember that." Down the corridor, past the elevators, a door has opened a few inches. A small face appears in the gap. A girl 6 years old, woken by the big voice in the marble room, a one-eared stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. She does not understand the words. She understands the shape of them. She understands that a large man is standing over her mother and that her mother is on the floor. She takes one step into the corridor, and Nora, who has not reacted to any of it, who has taken the insult and the threat and the laughter without so much as a tightening of the jaw, lifts her eyes for 1/2 second and finds her daughter down the hall and gives the smallest shake of her head. "Stay. It's all right. Stay." The child stops. The rabbit's single ear is pressed flat under her chin. She does not cry. She has her mother's stillness in her already. Sloane never sees the girl. He never sees the rabbit or the moth stitched into its mended ear, or the fact that the only thing in the world that could make this woman bow her head is now standing 40 feet behind him in a thin nightgown. He sees none of it, because he has already turned away. And here is the thing he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget. Nora does not answer. She does not flinch, does not argue, does not let her chin drop. She simply bends, picks up her cloth, and goes back to the scuff he has just made worse with his heel. Her hands move. Long fingers, a thin white seam of an old scar across two knuckles. They move with a precision that has nothing to do with mopping floors, a steadiness that belongs to a different kind of work entirely. And across the lobby, near the coat desk, an old woman has gone very still. She is small and severe in charcoal wool, silver hair cut blunt at the jaw, a cane she does not lean on. She arrived early to walk the room. She always walks a room before she judges it, and she has been watching the whole thing from the shadow of a pillar. She's not watching Sloane. She's watching the janitor's hands. She watches the way the thumb anchors and the fingers feather, the angle of the wrist, a motion she last saw a decade ago across a cutting table under a north-facing window, and the blood leaves her face. The clipboard woman says, "Of course, Mr. Sloane." Sloane is already walking away, already on to the next sentence, the slip forgotten because men like him are allowed to forget. But the old woman by the coat desk does not move. Her knuckles have gone white on the head of the cane. Her lips part around a word she has not said aloud in 10 years. It is not pity on her face. It is recognition. Before we go further, do something small for me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. The city, the town, the kitchen table, the late shift on a break. And if you have ever been the person nobody in the room thought to look at, the one who cleans up after the people who never say thank you, then subscribe and stay with me. Because the woman on her knees in that lobby is not who Julian Sloane thinks she is. She is not who anyone in that building thinks she is. And the old woman by the coat desk is about to remember a name the whole fashion world buried. Her name was on the door of a house in Paris once. It was sewn in silver thread into the lining of gowns that hang now in museums behind glass. It was a name spoken with a kind of hush, the way you speak the names of people who make beautiful things and then vanish. To understand what is going to happen tomorrow night, to understand the dress and the moth, and the 400 people who will forget how to breathe, you have to go back. Back before the gray uniform, back before the cart with the ticking wheel, back to when Nora Quinn had a different name and her hands were famous. 12 years ago, in a narrow studio above a flower shop, there was a sign painted by hand on a frosted glass door. One word: Vesper. It meant evening, the hour when the light goes soft and forgiving and a person can be more than the day allowed them to be. Nora chose it because that was the hour her mother used to sew after the cleaning jobs were done, after the dishes, when the kitchen table finally belonged to her. Nora had learned to thread a needle in that light, sitting on her mother's lap, watching grease-stained hands turn other people's cast-offs into something a girl could wear to school and not be ashamed. Her mother used to say, "You are not what they pay you to be. You are what your hands can make." Nora believed it. She built a life on believing it. Vesper began with nothing. A second-hand machine. Bolts of fabric bought on credit. Nora drafting patterns at 2 in the morning on the back of grocery receipts. And one other person, a quiet man named Daniel Quinn, the finest cutter she had ever seen, who could lay a blade against silk and never waste a thread. She hired him first. She fell in love with him second, slowly, the way you fall in love with someone whose work you respect. He never raised his voice. He measured twice and cut once and looked at her over the table in a way that made the long nights feel less long. They were married in a courthouse on a Tuesday because they could not afford to close the studio on a Saturday. She wore a dress she made herself. He cried quietly, the way he did everything. And Vesper grew. It grew because Nora made clothes that did something the famous houses had forgotten how to do. They made the woman wearing them feel seen, not displayed, seen, A widow could stand in a Vesper coat and feel her own spine again. A girl from nowhere could wear a Vesper gown into a room full of old money and walk like she belonged there, because the dress was not about the money. It was about the standing. Critics did not know what to make of it at first. Beautiful, yes, but quiet. No logos, no noise. And then one of them came to see for herself. Her name was Vivian Ashford, and she was the most feared woman in the business, a critic whose single column could end a house or make one immortal, who had buried more designers than she could count, and never once apologized. She came to the little studio above the flower shop expecting to be unimpressed. She had built a career on being unimpressed. Nora dressed her in a coat the color of wet slate. Said almost nothing. Let the work talk. Vivienne stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Then she did something she had not done in 20 years. She asked who had made it, not which house. Who? The hands. I did, Nora said. Vivienne turned the coat inside out, the way she always did, looking for the shortcut, the cheat, the place where the seam betrayed the lie. And in the lining, tucked into the inner seam where no buyer would ever look, she found it. A moth, small, stitched in silver thread no thicker than a hair. Wings open, the way a moth opens at dusk, at the Vesper hour. A maker's mark, sewn by hand, that took Nora 4 minutes and a kind of patience most people did not have for things no one would see. "Why hide it?" Vivienne asked. "Put it on the outside. Sell the name." Nora shook her head. "The woman should be the one people see, not me." Vivienne Ashford, who trusted no one, looked at that moth for a long moment. Then she wrote a column that began with one sentence the whole industry memorized. "I have found a designer who understands that the point was never the designer." After that, everything changed. There was a woman who came to the studio in that first year, in the early days after the column, when the orders had begun to come faster than 2 people could fill them. She was the widow of a man who had spent her dry, and she had been invited to a function she could not refuse and could not afford, full of people who had watched her husband leave her with nothing and were waiting, the way such people wait, to see her wear her shame in public. She could pay for very little. She said so at the door, with the flat dignity of a woman braced to be turned away. Nora did not turn her away. Nora sat her down by the north window and made her tea, and looked at her for a long time, not at her measurements, at her, the way she held her shoulders against the dread of the room she was about to enter. Then Nora made her something out of fabric she had on hand, charging her almost nothing, working 3 nights to do it. And when the widow put it on, she did not look expensive. That was the trick of it, the thing the famous houses had forgotten. She did not look expensive. She looked unafraid. She looked like a woman no one in that room would dare to pity. The widow stood in front of the mirror and wept, the quiet kind, and asked Nora how she could ever repay her. "You'll walk into that room and you'll let them look," Nora said. "That's the whole bill." The widow walked into the room. They looked. And no one pitied her, because you cannot pity a woman who is not asking you to, and the dress had made her ask nothing of anyone. That was Vesper, not the silk, not the silver, the standing. Daniel used to watch her do this and shake his head. "You'll never get rich," he told her once, over the cutting table, late, both of them tired and happy. "You keep giving the magic away to the ones who can't pay for it." "The ones who can pay don't need the magic," she said. "They've got the money. The magic is for the ones who've got nothing else." He looked at her then the way he always did, over the silk, and he did not argue, because he knew she was right, and because he had married her for exactly that reason. He kept the books so that she could keep the magic. That was how they fit. He was the careful hands and the level table. She was the eye and the nerve. Between them they built a house that dressed a queen for a state dinner and a broke widow for the worst night of her life, and treated both of them, in the end, the same, any more as warmar noir, warmal. Disser war and tea, our brow, our wakan war into chow. Room and ask nothing of it. If you have ever made something good with your own hands and watched someone else take the credit, type I see you in the comments. Stay with me, because the credit is exactly what they came for. The house rose fast. Within 4 years, Vesper dressed senators' wives and film actresses and a queen, once for a state dinner. The gowns went into museums. The moth became a thing collectors hunted for. Hunter sayer pine my, arcane mire, mine, turning a sleeve inside out at auction to find the little silver wings and gasping when they did. Through all of it, Nora did not change. She still drafted patterns at 2 in the morning. She still mended the night crew cleaner's torn apron when it caught on a nail, because the cleaner had 3 kids and no time. She still came in through the back. Daniel ran the cutting floor and the books, careful as ever, registering every design, filing every paper, keeping the legal bones of the house in order because he understood something Nora never wanted to think about, that the world is full of men who take. He kept a thimble in his vest pocket. Silver, dented, an old thing he'd found in a junk shop the week they met. He'd had it engraved, 2 letters on the inside rim, DQ, and below them, the date of the Tuesday they were married. He never sewed without it. He said it kept his hand honest. Then, in the spring of the house's 7th year, Daniel sat down at the cutting table to lay out the pattern for a gown he and Nora had been dreaming up for a year, the most beautiful thing either of them had ever attempted, a single piece, the Vesper gown, evening made into cloth. And his hand stopped over the silk. He looked at her with mild surprise, as if he'd forgotten something on the stove. Then he was on the floor, and the silk was sliding off the table over him like water, and the thimble rolled into the corner and rang once against the baseboard, and Nora was on her knees beside him with both hands pressed to his chest, and the ambulance was 40 minutes away because it was the spring of the floods and half the roads were under water. His heart. No warning. 46 years old. The last thing he said to her, with the small, clear surprise still on his face, was her name. Grief did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a tide. It came in, and it did not go back out. She finished the Vesper gown. She had to. She and Daniel had cut the silk together, and she would not let the last thing they made die half-born. She sewed the whole of it by hand over 6 weeks, alone in the studio at the Vesper hour, and into the lining she stitched the moth, and beside the moth, in the same silver thread, 2 letters, DQ, the thimble on her finger the whole time. It was the finest thing she ever made. It was never shown. She hung it in a garment bag in the back of the storage room, and she could not look at it. And while she was grieving, the men who take were already moving. Daniel had been the careful one, the one who watched the money. Without him, the house had a year of bad decisions and worse luck. Supplier collapse. A flood-ruined season, a loan that came due. Nothing she could not have survived. Nothing that should have ended a house worth what Vesper was worth. But there was a man circling. There always is. Julian Sloan did not know how to make anything. What he knew how to do was buy the thing other people made at the exact moment they were too weak to hold it. He came to Nora's grief with a lawyer and a smile and a number, and when she said no, he stopped smiling and bought the debt instead. He bought the loan. He bought the lease. He bought the flooded supplier's claim. And then he sat across a table from a widow 11 months into the worst year of her life and explained, kindly, the way a man explains weather, that the house was his now. The name, the patterns on file, the archive, the moth. The brand has value, he told her. You don't. Sentiment isn't an asset, Mrs. Quinn. I'll keep the name. I'll let it mean something again. You should be grateful it'll live on at all. She fought. Of course she fought. But Daniel's careful paperwork, the registrations, the design filings, every document that proved whose hands had made what, was in the archive, and the archive was in the building, and the building was already his. Or so he believed. Because there was one thing Daniel had done that Sloane's lawyers never found. The final collection, the unshown one, the one with the Vesper gown, Daniel had registered privately, in Nora's own name, in a separate filing he kept not in the studio, but in a fireproof box at home, along with the original sketches in Nora's hand and his own notarized statement of authorship. He had done it the month before he died. He had not told her why. He was just careful. He was always careful. She didn't even open the box for 2 years. She didn't have the strength. When the dust settled, Julian Sloane owned the name Vesper and everything in the archive. Nora Quinn owned a fireproof box, a silver thimble, a garment bag she could not bear to unzip, and a daughter she had not yet met, because she was, in the middle of all of it, 4 months pregnant with the child Daniel never knew was coming. She walked away. She did not go to the press. She did not make a scene. Making a scene was for people who still believed the room would listen, and Nora had stopped believing that. She took the one true thing she had left, the gown, the box, the thimble, and she disappeared into the largest city she could find, where a woman with a baby and no name could become invisible if she worked at it. She took her mother's first lesson and turned it inside out. You are what your hands can make. All right. Then her hands would make a living any way they could. She cleaned offices. She cleaned hospitals. She cleaned, eventually, the gleaming tower of a man named Julian Sloane, because it paid 11 cents more an hour than the last place, and the night shift meant she could be home in the mornings. She did not know, when she took the job, whose building it was. By the time she found out, the rent was already paid a month ahead, and a woman like Nora does not walk away from a paid month for the sake of her pride. Pride was another thing she had hung in a garment bag and zipped shut. Her name now was Nora Quinn. Just Quinn. The night crew called her Quiet. The supervisor, a kind, tired man named Mr. Okafor, called her the best he'd ever had. Never late, never careless. The only one who noticed when a thing was wrong before it broke. The young security guard on the night desk, a steady, soft-spoken man named Theo, called her nothing at all out loud, but he kept the back door propped on cold nights and left the good coffee in the pot for her. And once, when Lily had a fever and there was no one, he sat with the sleeping child in the guard booth for 2 hours and never said a word about it to anyone. Lily was 6 now. Small for her age, watchful, with her father's surprised eyes and her mother's still hands. She came to the building on the nights there was no one to leave her with, which was most nights, and she slept in the break room on 2 pushed-together chairs under Nora's coat, and she carried everywhere a one-eared stuffed rabbit named Pip. Pip had lost the ear to a closing car door when Lily was 4. Lily had wept as though the world had ended, and Nora had taken the rabbit to the break room that night, and from the small kit she kept in her cart, needle, thread, the silver thimble on her finger. She had sewn the ear back on by the light of a vending machine. She used the only stitch she truly trusted, and when she finished, in the soft fur at the base of the mended ear where only a mother would ever look, she stitched out of habit, out of love, out of a self she could not entirely bury, a small silver moth. Lily slept with the rabbit pressed under her chin every night after that. She did not know the moth meant anything. She only knew her mother had made the hurt place strong again. The week before the gala, Sloane Tower forgot how to sleep. The day crew doubled. Florists came with carts taller than men. Lighting designers argued in the dark about the angle of a single beam. And through all of it moved Julian Sloane, more himself than ever, because a man like him is never more fully himself than in the days before he gets the thing he has wanted. Nora watched him from the edges, the way the night crew watches everyone. From the places no one looks. She saw him fire a lighting tech on a Tuesday for a flicker that was not the tech's fault. She saw him reduce a young event planner to tears on a Wednesday over the wrong shade of white in the table linens, then turn to his entourage and shrug. Some people just can't handle pressure, as if the pressure had not been him. She saw him keep an elderly caterer standing for 20 minutes in the lobby while he took a call about a yacht, and then waved the man off without a word. It was never one cruelty. That was the thing about him. It was 100 small ones, each too small to fight, each leaving the room a little colder than it found it. He did not roar. He corrected. He did not strike. He dismissed. And everyone learned, the way people do under a man like that, to grow quiet when he entered and to breathe again when he left. Everyone except Nora, who had been quiet for 10 years already and had nothing left for him to take. She did her work. She found, as she always did, the things that were wrong before they broke. A loose bolt in the rigging that held the great chandelier over the dais. She flagged it. En la sortes des. And das darts and Day, the day foreman, who had learned to trust the quiet woman on nights, had it fixed before anyone fell. A water stain blooming under the new carpet from a pipe no one had checked. A crack in the marble where the crate had been wheeled in. Too hard. She caught all of it. She said little about any of it. Mr. Okafor told the building manager, more than once, that the night woman saw more than the cameras did, and the building manager, who answered to Sloane, did not pass it on, because praise of a janitor was not the kind of thing that traveled upward in that building. The crate came up the freight elevator on the Wednesday. Nora was mopping the corridor outside the gallery when they wheeled it past, a long flat wooden thing stenciled "Fragile, Vesper, Do Not Tilt," and her hands stopped on the mop handle, and her heart did something it had not done in years. She did not let herself look until that night, alone, after the crew had gone. The gallery was dark except for the work lights. The placard stood on its little easel, draped, waiting, and Nora, who had cleaned that room every night for a week without letting herself read it, finally lifted the cloth. The Vesper gown, designed by the House of Vesper, lost and found again. She stood with the cloth in her hand for a long time, in the dark, in the gray uniform, in the silence of a building that did not know her, and she thought about the north window and the cool light and the man who had died at the table making the thing they were about to call found. Then she put the cloth back exactly as it had been. She finished the floor. She did not let her hands shake until she was in the stairwell, alone, where the cameras did not reach. That was Wednesday. On Thursday, 9 minutes to 7, Julian Sloane stepped off an elevator and slipped on a wet floor and decided it was her fault. That is who was on her knees in the lobby when Julian Sloane told her that people like her should be grateful for the floor. That night, after he was gone, Nora did not cry. She finished the floor. She put out the sign, "Caution, wet floor." 6 minutes too late to matter, and she stood it where his heel had been, and there was something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth that did not reach her eyes. Then she went to the break room, where Lily was asleep under her coat with Pip beneath her chin, and she sat down on the third chair and put her face in her famous, ruined, grease and bleach-scented hands, and she let herself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the full weight of the thing. Tomorrow, Julian Sloane would relaunch Vesper. 400 guests, press from 9 countries, and the centerpiece of the gala. She had heard the day crew talking, had cleaned around the crate when it came up the freight elevator, was to be the unveiling of a single legendary, lost design. A gown the house had supposedly discovered in its archive and faithfully reconstructed. The marketing called it the soul of the house, recovered. She had not let herself believe it until she cleaned the gallery, where it would hang, and saw the placard already printed, waiting under a cloth. The Vesper gown, designed by the House of Vesper, lost and found again. Her gown, her and Daniel's. The last thing they ever made together, the one she sewed by hand in the worst weeks of her life, the one that had never been shown, because the design had never been in the archive Sloane bought. It had been in the fireproof box, in her name, which meant they could not have it. which meant whatever was in that crate, whatever they were going to unveil to 400 guests and the press of 9 countries as the soul of the house recovered, was a forgery, a guess, a beautiful lie sewn by someone who had seen a sketch and copied the shape and could not possibly know about the moth or the 2 letters beside it or the way the inner seam was finished, because those things had only ever existed in one place in the world, in a garment bag, in a storage unit across town, where the real one hung, untouched, for 10 years. Nora lowered her hands and looked at her sleeping daughter, at the small mended rabbit, at the cart with the ticking wheel, and for the first time in a decade, she let herself think a dangerous thought. She thought, I could go. She did not sleep that night. She lay on her side on the narrow bed in the narrow apartment, Lily breathing slow beside her, the rabbit's mended ear against the child's cheek, and she did the arithmetic of her whole life. If she went, she lost the invisibility, and the invisibility was not nothing. The invisibility was the wall she had built around her daughter with 10 years of bricks. The day people knew that Nora Quinn used to be someone, they would want the story, and the story would become Lily's story whether Lily wanted it or not. And Nora had spent 6 years making sure her daughter grew up as the child of a woman who cleaned floors and was not ashamed of it, not as the orphaned heir to a stolen kingdom. If she went, she lost the job, the 11 cents more job, the paid a month ahead job. If she went, she would have to walk back into a world that had watched her be robbed and said nothing, and ask it to look at her again. And if she did not go, a man who had taken her husband's life's work and her own name would stand in front of 400 people and the press of 9 countries and lie about the one thing she and Daniel had made that he had never been able to touch. He would call the forgery the soul of the house. And the lie would become the truth, the way lies do when no one stands up in the room, and Daniel's last work would belong to Julian Sloane forever. She thought about her mother sewing at the vesper hour. You are not what they pay you to be. Sometime before dawn, she stopped doing arithmetic. Across the city, in an apartment full of 40 years of fashion history, Vivian Ashford was not sleeping either. She had gone home from Sloane Tower with a wrongness she could not name. She had walked the Gala room as she was paid to walk it. Sloane had hired her, the great Vivian Ashford, to stand beside the centerpiece tomorrow and lend it her authority, to tell 400 guests that yes, this was real, this was the lost soul of Vesper, recovered. She was the only living person whose word the market would take. That was why he wanted her. A forgery is only worth what an authority will swear to. She had seen the reconstructed gown that afternoon, under its cloth, and it had troubled her, though she could not say why. It was beautiful. It was very nearly right, and very nearly right was the most damning thing a garment could be. But it was the janitor's hands that kept her awake. She had stood in the dark of her study and pulled a box down from a high shelf, a box she had not opened in a decade, and inside it was a coat the color of wet slate, the first thing she had ever bought from a designer instead of being given, and she had turned it inside out, the way she always did, and there in the inner seam was the moth, small, silver, wings open at the vesper hour. She held the coat for a long time. Then she said, to the empty room, the word that had left her face white in the lobby. A name. Nora. She did not yet let herself believe it. The woman she remembered had vanished off the face of the earth a decade ago. Houses don't die that quietly. People don't. But the hands. She had spent 50 years training her eye on hands, and a person's hands are the one thing they cannot disguise. You can change a name. You cannot change the angle of a wrist that learned to feather a seam under a north window. In the morning she went to the tower early, before the florists, before the lighting crew, and she walked the lower floors with her cane she did not lean on, and she found the break room by following the smell of cheap coffee, and there, sitting on two pushed-together chairs, eating a packet of crackers for breakfast, was a small girl with surprised eyes and a one-eared rabbit. "That's a fine rabbit," Vivienne said, who had not spoken gently to a child in 30 years. "His name is Pip," the girl said. "His ear came off, but my mom fixed it. She fixes everything." "Did she?" Vivienne lowered herself, slowly, onto the edge of the third chair. "May I see?" The girl, with the grave trust of the very young, held out the rabbit. And Vivienne, Ashford, turned the mended ear gently in her old fingers, and parted the soft fur at the base of it, and found, stitched in silver thread no thicker than a hair, wings open at the vesper hour, a moth. The cane slipped from her hand and rang against the floor. She found Nora in the gallery, on her knees again, polishing the brass rail that would tomorrow night hold back 400 people from a lie. For a moment neither of them spoke. Nora knew who she was. Everyone in the building knew who Vivienne Ashford was, and Nora understood, from the way the old woman was looking at her, that the wall had already come down, that the moth on the rabbit's ear had told the whole story, before Nora could decide whether to tell it. "Mrs. Quinn," Vivienne said. "Yes. That is not your name." Nora set down the cloth. She stood, the way she always stood, weight even, hands loose. "It's my husband's name. It's a true name." "Your husband." Vivienne's voice did something it had not done in years. It softened. "Daniel, the cutter. I remember his hands, too." She was quiet a moment. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd—" "10 years," Nora said. The old woman nodded slowly. She looked at the covered placard, at the cloth over the crate, at the gleaming room being readied for the most expensive lie of Julian Sloane's career. "They've asked me to stand beside it tomorrow," Vivienne said, "to tell the world it's real. Do you understand what that means? My word built that house once. My word is the only thing that can rebuild it. He's not buying a gown. He's buying me." Her jaw tightened. "I've put my name to a great many things I'm not proud of in 50 years. But I never put it to a forgery. And I am not going to start by helping a man who'd fire a woman for cleaning his floor too well." She picked up her cane. She stood as straight as the years would let her. "The real one still exists, doesn't it?" It was not a question. "You'd never let it go. Where is it?" Nora looked at her for a long moment, at the only person in the world who had ever found the moth, all those years ago, and asked not which house, but whose hands. "In a storage unit," Nora said quietly. "In a garment bag. I haven't unzipped it in 10 years. "Then we are going to unzip it," Vivienne said, "tonight." It was raining again by the time Nora opened the storage unit, the same long silver ropes that had run down the tower's glass, and the door rolled up on 10 years of a life she had refused to look at. Daniel's drafting table, boxes of his careful papers, the fireproof box which she had opened exactly once, and in the back, in a garment bag, gone gray with dust, the gown. She unzipped it with the storage unit light buzzing overhead and the rain loud on the metal roof, and Lily stood beside her holding Pip, and Vivienne stood behind them both with her hand pressed to her mouth. The vesper gown came out of its long dark like the evening it was named for, deep blue going to black at the hem, the way the sky goes at the vesper hour, and worked through the bodice in silver thread so fine it caught the buzzing light and turned it into something like the first stars. 10 years had not touched it. Nora had finished every seam by hand, the last thing she and Daniel ever dreamed, and it had waited. Lily said, in the small voice of a child seeing a thing she has no word for, "Mama, did you make that?" and Nora Quinn, who had not cried the night her husband died on the studio floor, who had not cried when the lawyer explained the weather of his theft, who had not cried in 10 years of bleach and night shifts and crackers for breakfast, knelt down on the cold concrete next to her daughter and the one-eared rabbit and put her famous hands over her face, and finally wept. Vivienne let her. She knew enough not to speak. When it was done, Nora turned the bodice gently inside out, and there in the inner seam was the moth, and beside the moth, in the same silver thread, 2 letters. DQ. "There," said Vivienne softly. "There he is." Nora stood. She looked at the gown that no one had ever seen. She looked at her sleeping work, 10 years dark, ready. "It won't fit me anymore," she said. "I'm not the woman who made it." "No," Vivienne agreed. "You're the woman who survived her." She reached into her coat and drew out, of all things, a tape measure, worn soft with use. "Lucky for you," she said. "I've been letting out seams since before your mother was born. We have until 8 o'clock. Get the thimble." Nora reached into the pocket of her gray uniform shirt, where she carried it always, a worn silver thimble engraved on the inner rim with 2 letters and the date of a Tuesday. "How did you know I had it?" she asked. Vivienne almost smiled. "Because your husband never sewed a stitch without it," she said. "And neither, I'd wager, have you. If you have ever been told to be grateful for the scraps while someone else dined on what you built, type 'never judge' in the comments and stay with me. Because in a few hours, 400 people are going to learn what Julian Sloan's hands can't make. And the storm outside Sloan Tower is just getting started. By 8 o'clock, the rain has stopped and Sloan Tower is lit like a held flame. 400 guests move through the gallery in black and silver, and the air is thick with the smell of lilies and money. Cameras line the far wall, press from 9 countries, lenses long as arms. Waiters drift with trays. Somewhere a string quartet plays something restrained and expensive. And on a raised dais at the center of the room, under a fall of white cloth, stands the centerpiece, the lost soul of the house, recovered. Julian Sloan owns the room the way he owns the building. He moves through it shaking hands, kissing cheeks, his laugh arriving a half-second before his jokes. He has waited years for this night. The acquisition, the rebuild, the slow, careful work of turning a dead name into a living brand, tonight it pays. Tonight, Vesper is his in front of the whole world, and the only thing left is for the most trusted eye in fashion to stand beside the gown and say the word that makes a forgery into a fortune. He finds Vivienne Ashford near the dais, severe in charcoal, her cane in her hand. "Vivienne." He takes both her hands, which she allows the way one allows a draft. "The room is yours whenever you're ready. You speak, you confirm the piece, we lift the cloth. They'll print your face beside it in the morning." "They will print something beside it," Vivienne says. He does not hear the edge in it. Men like him rarely hear edges. He squeezes her hands and goes to the microphone, and the quartet falls silent, and 400 faces turn. He is good at this. That has to be admitted. He talks about heritage and craft and the tragedy of a great house lost, about the years of painstaking work to recover its soul, about Vesper rising again. He does not mention the widow. He does not mention the cutter who died on a studio floor, or the woman who walked away with a fireproof box. He has edited them out of the story so completely that he has by now half forgotten they were ever in it. "Tonight," he says, "we unveil the heart of the collection, a design lost for a decade, recovered, restored, and authenticated by the one voice this industry trusts above all others." He turns, presenting her with an open hand. "Vivienne Ashford." The applause is warm. Vivienne does not move into it right away. She lets it settle. She has held more rooms than this man has ever stood in, and she knows the value of a silence. Then she walks to the microphone, and she does not look at the crowd. She looks at the cover gown. "Lift it," she says. The cloth falls, and there it is, the reconstruction, the very nearly right. Beautiful under the light, deep blue to black, silver worked through the bodice. A gasp moves through the room. Cameras fire. It is to 400 people who have never turned a garment inside out in their lives. Perfect. Vivian studies it. She reaches out with one old hand and turns the bodice gently at the seam. The gesture of a lifetime, the gesture she has made 10,000 times, looking for the place where the lie lives. She finds it. She turns back to the microphone, and her voice carries to every corner of the marble room. "This is a very fine copy," she says. The applause dies in the air. "It is the work of a skilled hand. The shape is close. The color is close. The silver is well done." She lets that hang. But the soul of a house is not its shape or its color. It is the thing the maker put where no buyer would ever look. And this gown, she turns the seam outward, holds it up, empty, has no moth. The murmur starts low and spreads. Sloane's smile holds, but something behind it has begun to slip. "Vivian, I think you're the House of Vesper," she says over him, the way only she can speak over a man like him. "Marked every original piece with a moth. Stitched by hand, in the inner seam, in silver thread. Not as a logo, as a signature. Every true gown that house ever made carries one." She lowers the empty seam. "This one does not. Because this one was not made by the hands that made Vesper. It was made by someone copying a sketch. Which raises a question I find I cannot ignore in front of all these cameras." She looks at Sloane for the first time. "Where is the original, Mr. Sloane, and who made it?" And at the back of the gallery, the great doors open. The room turns the way a field of grass turns in wind, all at once, a single motion. Nora Quinn stands in the doorway in the Vesper gown. 10 years of dust gone from it. Vivian's tape measure and Nora's own thimble had let the seams out over 4 hours that afternoon, until it fit the woman she had become, and now it falls around her like the evening it was named for. Deep blue going to black, silver caught through the bodice, like the first stars at dusk. Her hair is down, her hands are loose at her sides, and she stands the way she has always stood, in a lobby on her knees, or in a doorway in a gown that should hang in a museum. Weight even, shoulders level, chin neither raised nor lowered. She does not pose. She does not pause for effect. She simply walks into the room, and the crowd opens in front of her without being asked, and 400 people, who came to look at a dress, find they cannot stop looking at the woman wearing it. Somewhere near the front, a society columnist who had been in the lobby that morning leans to the man beside her and says, too loud in the silence, "That's the cleaner. That's the janitor he fired this morning. I saw it. He fired her for the floor." The whisper travels. The janitor. The one he fired. That's her. It moves through the press at the wall, and the long lenses swing. Not to the gown now, but to Julian Sloane, who is standing very still on his dais with the white cloth pooled at his feet. Nora reaches the center of the room. She stops in front of the forgery, beside Vivian, and for a long moment she only looks at the copy of the thing she made. The very nearly right shape of her husband's last work. "It's a good copy," she says quietly. Her voice is not raised. It does not need to be. The room has gone so silent you can hear the lilies. Whoever made it worked hard. I'm not angry at them. She turns the empty seam of the forgery in her own fingers. The same gesture, and something in the way she does it makes the cameras fire again. They just never knew about the moth. How could they? It was never in the archive he bought. She turns her own bodice gently inside out, and there, in the inner seam, in silver thread no thicker than a hair, wings open at the vesper hour, the moth, and beside it, in the same thread, 2 letters. The room does not gasp. It does something quieter and stranger. 400 people lean forward at once, a single slow motion, the way a tide draws back from a shore before it turns. A woman in the third row sets her glass down on a passing tray without looking, eyes fixed on the seam. A photographer lowers his camera entirely, because some things you watch with your own eyes. And on the dais, Julian Sloane's hand rises halfway to his collar and stops there, in the air, mid-motion, the way a man's hand stops when the floor he was sure of moves under him. Vivienne leans in. She does not need to, she already knows. But she does it for the cameras, for the record, for the press of 9 countries. She studies the moth for a long, deliberate moment. Then she straightens, and her voice does not shake. "This is an original work of the House of Vesper," she says. "I would stake my name on it. I am staking my name on it." She turns to the room. The letters beside the moth are D.Q. Daniel Quinn, the cutter, the man who built the bones of that house and died at his table making this very design. She lets that land. And the woman wearing it, the woman this man fired this morning for cleaning his floor too well. That's enough. Sloane's voice cracks across the room. He has come down off the dais. The smile is gone. This is theater. This woman is an employee, a cleaner. She mops my floors. Whatever stunt this is. She founded the house whose name is on your building, Vivienne says. The murmur becomes a sound with weight to it. The design you are calling recovered, Vivienne goes on, relentless now, every word level, was never in your archive, Mr. Sloane, because it was registered privately, a month before Daniel Quinn died, in his wife's name. There is a notarized statement of authorship. There are original sketches in her hand. There is a fireproof box that your lawyers never found because it was never in the building you bought. You did not recover the soul of this house tonight. She gestures at the forgery. You attempted to forge it, and you asked me to swear to the forgery in front of the world. It does not end in one blow. It ends the way a tide goes out, in 100 small withdrawals. A board member at the front, a careful man in a gray suit, takes one quiet step back from Sloane, then another, until there is daylight between him and the host. A sponsor whose logo is printed on the program turns to her assistant and says something low and urgent, and the assistant begins, very calmly, to leave. The press at the wall is no longer photographing the gown at all. Every lens is on Sloane, and the soft, relentless clatter of shutters has become the loudest sound in the room. The unraveling is made of small things. The building manager, the one who never passed along a word of praise for the night woman who saw more than the cameras, has gone the color of the marble. He is doing arithmetic of his own now, the arithmetic of a man realizing which side of the room he wants to be standing on when the morning papers print. The young event planner Sloane reduced to tears on a Wednesday is near the bar, and she is not crying now. She is watching with the still, bright attention of someone witnessing a thing she had stopped believing would ever happen. The elderly caterer kept standing 20 minutes in the lobby as by the door, and he has set down his tray to watch, and there is no pity on his face either. A sycophant who arrived on Sloane's arm an hour ago, who laughed at all the right moments, drifts 3 steps sideways and finds a sudden urgent interest in his phone. Another follows. They peel off him one at a time, the way barnacles come off a hull, and each one leaves him a little more alone on his own marble floor. Somewhere a champagne flute is set down on a tray too hard and rings, a high clear note in the silence, and no one laughs, and the sound of it hangs there, like the slip he could not hide. The placard still stands on its easel beside the forgery. Lost and found again. In the new quiet, someone near the front reads it aloud, softly, and the irony of it moves through the room like cold air under a door. A young reporter near the front says it plainly, the way the young say things. "Mr. Sloane, did you fire the designer of this gown from a cleaning job this morning?" Sloane opens his mouth, closes it. He looks, for one terrible instant, exactly the way he looked in the lobby. A man who has lost his footing and is reaching out for the air to catch him. And this time, 400 people see him reach. "She's a cleaner," he says again, smaller now, because cruelty is the only tool he has ever owned, and a man does not put down his only tool even when it has stopped working. "She's nobody. She mops floors." And Nora finally turns and looks at him. She does not raise her voice. She does not gloat. She has waited 10 years, and she does not spend the moment cheaply. "I do mop floors," she says. "I've mopped them for 10 years to feed my daughter. There's no shame in it. My mother cleaned houses, and she had better hands than anyone in this room, and she taught me the only thing that ever turned out to be true." She pauses. The room leans in. "You are not what they pay you to be. You are what your hands can make." She looks at the forgery, then at the gown she is wearing, then back at him. "Your hands made this night, Mr. Sloane. Look at it." It is the closest she comes to a blow. It is enough. Somewhere in the silence after it, a small voice says, "Mama?" And Lily comes through the parted crowd in her second-hand dress, holding Pip by his mended ear, 6 years old and unafraid because her mother is in the room. She walks to Nora and takes her hand, and Nora, in a $2 million gown, in front of the press of 9 countries, kneels down the way she knelt to clean a scuff that morning, and gathers her daughter against the silver and the silk, and the cameras that came to photograph a dress photograph that instead. It is that image, not the gown, that runs in 9 countries by morning. A woman in an impossible dress, kneeling on a marble floor to hold a small child with a one-eared rabbit, while behind her a man in a perfect suit stands entirely alone in the middle of a room he used to own. You do not need a caption for a picture like that. The whole story is in the distance between the two of them. The woman who knelt by choice and the man who could not stop reaching for balance no one would lend him. Somewhere in the crowd, the broke widow Nora had dressed a lifetime ago, older now, gray, here on someone else's invitation, puts her hand to her mouth and recognizes the cut of the gown before she recognizes the woman, and begins quietly to cry. She is not the only one. There is a particular silence a room makes when it understands it has watched something true happen, and the gallery is full of it. Julian Sloane is still standing on his marble. No one is looking at him any more. That, in the end, is the whole of his punishment, and it is worse than any shouting. He has spent 30 years making sure every room turned toward him when he entered it. He will spend the rest of his life in rooms that have learned to turn away. Vivian steps back to the microphone. She is enjoying this now. There is no point pretending otherwise. She has waited 10 years, too. The gala will continue, she announces, as a retrospective of the real Vesper. I'll be happy to walk anyone who's interested through the difference between a thing that is made and a thing that is taken. She looks at Sloane, who is no longer at the center of his own room. Some of us can tell. And the strangest thing happens then. The room moves, but not toward the host, the way it has moved toward him all night, the way it has moved toward men like him at parties like this for as long as there have been parties. It moves toward the woman in the doorway, toward the gown with the moth in it. Guests who came to be seen near Julian Sloane drift, 1 and 2 at a time, across the marble to stand near Nora Quinn instead, the way iron filings turn when you move the magnet. They want to look at the silver work up close. They want to say they were there. The gravity of the room has shifted, quietly, completely, and it will never shift back. Nora does not stay to enjoy it. That was never the point. She lifts her sleeping no longer daughter onto her hip, gown and all, and she finds Vivian's eyes across the crowd, and the old woman gives her a small nod that says, "Go, I have the room." And Nora walks back out the way she came, through the great doors, past the press, into the cleared and quiet night, carrying her child and asking nothing of anyone. It is the same walk she made into the room. Weight even. Shoulders level. The only difference is that now 400 people are watching her go, and she does not turn around for a single one of them. She has somewhere better to be. She always did. Act 5, The Vesper Hour. Julian Sloane left his own gala through a side door. There is no need to spend long on him. That is the thing people always get wrong about justice. They think it should be loud, a man dragged down a staircase, a speech, a slap returned. It is rarely loud. It is a board that asks for his resignation in a quiet email 3 days later. It is a relaunch quietly canceled. It is a sponsor's logo removed from a website overnight, a name peeled off a building over a long weekend when no one is watching, a man discovering that the room he owned was only ever lent to him, and the loan has been called. He did not apologize. Men like him do not apologize. They only grow quieter and smaller, and they leave by side doors. Nora never spoke to him again. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did not need to. By midnight, the gala had emptied. The press had their story. The guests had drifted out into the cleared sky, already telling the version they would tell at dinner parties for years. I was there the night the janitor turned out to be the designer. The lilies wilted in their vases. The forgery stood abandoned on its dais under the lights, very nearly right, fooling no one now. And Nora Quinn stood in the middle of the marble gallery in a $2 million gown, holding her sleeping daughter, with a one-eared rabbit dangling from the child's hand. Theo found them there. He had worked the door all night, watched the whole of it from his post, and said nothing, because saying nothing was what Theo did best. Now he came across the empty floor with his security jacket over his arm, and he draped it, without a word, over Lily's shoulders, because the room had gone cold and the child was in a thin dress. "You'll want the freight elevator," he said quietly. "Press is still out front." "Thank you, Theo." He looked at the gown. He looked at the woman he had brought coffee to on 100 night shifts. The woman whose cart he had fixed when the wheel finally seized. The woman whose feverish child he had once sat beside for 2 hours in a guard booth. He had never once thought of her as nobody. That, it turned out, was its own kind of seeing. "I always figured you used to be something," he said. It was not a question, and it was not flattery. It was just true. "The way you fix things. You don't learn that mopping floors." "My mother learned it mopping floors," Nora said. Theo thought about that. "Then I figure your mother used to be something too." And Nora Quinn, in the gown she had wept over on a concrete floor that afternoon, laughed. A small, surprised, rusty sound, the first real laugh in longer than she could remember. "Yes," she said. She was. The weeks after were not a fairy tale. Fairy tales end at the gala. Lives go on past it. There were lawyers, because there are always lawyers, and the fireproof box that Daniel had filled in the careful last month of his life turned out to be the most valuable thing Nora owned, the notarized statement of authorship, the private registration in her name, the original sketches, drawn in her own hand, of a gown a forger had only guessed at. Sloane's lawyers looked at all of it for one afternoon and advised their client, in the dry language of people delivering bad news to powerful men, to settle. She could have taken everything. The lawyers told her so plainly, with the eager light of people who smell a long and profitable fight. She could have bled him in court for years. She could have had the building. She did not want the building. She took back her name and her husband's work, and the rights to every original Vesper design Sloane had been sitting on for a decade. The rest of the settlement, and it was not small, she put into a fund. A quiet one, no plaque, no gala. It paid the medical bills of garment workers, the ones with better hands than anyone in any boardroom, the ones who sew the things the rich wear and are never once seen. Her mother's kind of women. She named the fund after no one. Vivian thought she was a fool not to put her own name on it, and said so, and Nora only smiled and said the maker did not need the room to see her. She had learned that the day she chose not to speak in the lobby, the strongest thing she ever did was stay still, and let the truth do the work later. Revenge would have made her loud. She had been quiet for 10 years. She found she liked herself better that way. The name Vesper came home. Not as an empire. Nora had watched what empires cost, and she wanted none of it. It came home as a name on a frosted glass door the way it had begun. She did not build a tower. She took a narrow studio above a bakery this time instead of a flower shop, because Lily liked the smell of bread in the mornings. She bought a second-hand machine, because the new ones never feel right under the hands, and she hung Daniel's drafting table by the north window, where the light came in cool and even, the only light worth cutting silk by. The makers came back on their own. Word travels fast among people who work with their hands. Within a month of the gala, they began to find her. The cutters and finishers and pattern makers who had been scattered to the wind when Sloan gutted the house a decade before, the ones who had taken jobs they hated under managers who did not know a French seam from a fault line. A finisher named Rosa, who had cried the day the original studio closed, climbed the stairs above the bakery, looked at the north window and the drafting table, and put down her bag without being asked. An old cutter named Marek, who had cut beside Daniel for 6 years, came in, ran his thumb along the edge of the table where his friend had worked, and said only, "He kept it level. Good." And then he hung up his coat. One of them was a woman Nora had not expected. The night crew cleaner from Sloan Tower, the one with 3 kids, the one whose torn apron Nora had mended on a break years ago without being asked, the one who never knew the quiet woman beside her had once dressed a queen. She did not come to sew. She came because her oldest girl had a gift with a needle and nowhere to use it, and she had heard, the way people hear, that the woman who used to clean floors was teaching now. Nora took the girl on that afternoon. She taught her the moth stitch first before anything else, because that was the lesson that mattered. You mark the maker, even when no one will ever look. The studio filled with the sound of machines and the smell of bread, and it was small, and it was busy, and it was the first place in 10 years that felt to Nora like a thing she and Daniel had built rather than a thing that had been taken. Vivienne came on the first day with a bottle of something she said was older than Nora, and a frown that did not fool anyone anymore. She had announced her retirement from criticism the week before in a single line that the whole industry quoted, "I have written my last review. I would rather help make the thing than judge it." She took the chair by the cutting table as though she had always sat there. She did not call it mentorship, and neither did Nora. They both knew what it was. "You'll need cutters," Vivienne said. "Good ones are hard to find." "I know a few," Nora said. And she did, because word travels fast among people who work with their hands, and a house that marks the maker instead of the management does not want for makers willing to come. Theo came on Saturdays, at first to fix the studio's stubborn back door, and then to fix the radiator, and then, eventually, because Saturday had become the day he came. He did not say much. Neither did she. He brought the good coffee, the way he always had, and he learned to keep the children of the new young seamstresses entertained while their mothers worked, and one Saturday Nora looked up from the north window and found him teaching Lily to play checkers on the studio floor, the two of them deadly serious about it, and something in her chest that had been zipped shut for 10 years came quietly open. She did not announce it. He did not declare anything. One evening at the vesper hour, she made him a cup of tea the way she liked it instead of the way he had asked, and she set it down beside him, and he looked at the cup and then at her and understood that he had been let in. That was all. That was enough. The romance of it was in the tea, and the staying, and the checkers on the floor. The museum came to her in the spring. They wanted the original Vesper gown, not the forgery, that had been quietly destroyed or stored somewhere it would never be seen, which amounts to the same thing. They wanted the real one, the one she had sewn by hand in the worst weeks of her life, the last thing she and Daniel ever made. They offered a sum that made the lawyers sit up. They offered to put it behind glass forever, beside the great houses where 100,000 people a year would walk past it. Nora said no at first. It was Daniel's last work. It was the thing she had carried through 10 years of storage units and night shifts, the one thing she had never been able to unzip. To put it behind glass felt like burying him a second time. It was Vivienne who changed her mind, in the way only Vivienne could, which was to say bluntly. "You kept it in the dark for 10 years to protect it," she said. "It is the finest thing you ever made, and it has been seen by you, a child, an old woman, and a moth. That isn't protection. That's a tomb." She tapped her cane once on the studio floor. "He didn't cut that silk to have it hang in a bag. Let people see what your hands can do. Let them see his name beside yours. That is not burying him. That is the opposite." So Nora let it go, on loan, with conditions, the chief of which she wrote out herself in a steady hand. The placard would tell the truth. She went to the installation. They let her hang it herself, because no one else knew how it was meant to fall. She worked alone in the empty gallery before it opened, the silver thimble on her finger, settling the gown on its form the way you settle a sleeping child. And when it was right, she stepped back and read the small white card they had set beside it. The Vesper gown, designed by Nora Quinn, cut by Daniel Quinn, begun together, finished by her hand, alone. She stood with that for a while in the quiet, the way she had stood with the false placard in a dark gallery a season before. The two cards, one a lie and one the truth, and the difference between them 10 years and a moth. Lily came to the opening in her deep blue coat with the silver collar. She stood in front of the glass holding Pip and looked up at the gown for a long time, and then she said, in the small grave voice she used for important things, "People don't know about the moth." "No," Nora said. "It's too small to see from out here. You have to know it's there." "That's sad," Lily said. "Nobody knows it's the best part." Nora knelt down beside her daughter in the bright museum, among the strangers who came and looked and moved on, who saw the silk and the silver and the famous shape, and would never once think to wonder whose hands, and she felt no sadness at all. "It's not sad," she said. "We know. Your dad knew. That's who it was ever for." She touched the glass lightly once, the way you touch a thing you have made peace with. "The moth was never for them, Lily. It was never for the room. It was always just for us." A woman beside them, a stranger, leaned in close to the glass to admire the silver work at the bodice, so close her breath fogged it, and she never saw the moth, and she went away believing she had seen the whole of it. She had not, but that was all right. The best part of a thing made well is the part you keep. If you've read this far, you already know what kind of person you are. You're the kind who believes the quiet ones are worth watching. Subscribe and stay with me, because every week I find another story about someone the world looked straight through, and those are the only stories worth telling twice. There is a thing Nora did that she told almost no one about. The first gown she made under the reborn name. The very first, before the commissions, before the orders, before the museum that wanted the original Vesper gown behind glass and offered a sum that would have set Lily up for life. She made for no one. She made it small, child-sized. A coat the deep blue of the evening sky, worked through the collar in silver thread, and she sewed every stitch of it by hand at the north window at the Vesper hour, with a silver thimble on her finger engraved on the inner rim with 2 letters and the date of a Tuesday. When it was done, she turned it inside out, the way she always did, and into the inner seam she stitched a moth. And beside the moth, 2 letters, DQ. And then, beside those, for the first time in her life, she added 2 more. Q. She gave it to Lily on a Sunday morning with bread from the bakery downstairs and the studio full of cool north light. Lily put it on and turned in front of the mirror, 6 years old and grave, and then she did the thing that told Nora her daughter had been watching all along, the way children watch. She turned the collar inside out, looking for something, and she found the moth and the 4 letters, and she pressed her thumb against the silver thread the way her mother always did. "That's you and Daddy," Lily said, pointing. "And that's me." She looked up. "Is the moth so people know who made it?" "No," Nora said. She knelt down, the way she had knelt on a marble floor and a concrete floor and 100 floors before that. "The moth is so we know. The maker doesn't need the room to see her. She just needs to know it's hers." Lily considered this with the full seriousness of the very young. Then she took Pip down from the shelf, the one-eared rabbit, and she parted the fur at the base of the mended ear, and found the small silver moth there too, the one her mother had stitched by the light of a vending machine on the worst kind of ordinary night, and she smiled like a child who has just been let in on the oldest secret in her family. "Pip has one too," she said. "Pip was always one of us," Nora said. "Here is the last thing." A year later, on a cold, clear evening, Nora stood at the north window of the studio above the bakery, finishing a seam by hand. The frost was lifting off the glass as the heat came up. Down on the floor, Theo and Lily were arguing pleasantly about checkers. Vivian was asleep in the good chair with a magazine over her face, pretending she had not been. The kettle was beginning to sing. The silver thimble was on Nora's finger. It would go to Lily one day, the way these things go, down through hands that learn from hands. The original Vesper gown hung in a museum now, behind glass, with a small placard that finally told the truth. The names of the 2 people who had made it, the cutter and the designer, the man who died at his table and the woman who finished it alone. People stood in front of it and did not always know why their throats tightened. The moth was too small to see from behind the glass. You had to know it was there. Nora finished her seam. She bit the thread the way her mother had, the way no machine would ever do it. She held the work up to the lifting frost and the last of the light, and it was good, and no one in the room looked up, and that was exactly right. Outside, the city went on not knowing her name, and she found she did not mind at all. Her mother had been right about the only thing that ever turned out to be true. You are not what they pay you to be. You are not the floor they tell you to be grateful for. You are what your hands can make, and the people worth keeping are the ones who see it before you ever tell them. In the angle of a wrist, in a rabbit's mended ear, in a cup of tea set down the right way without a word. The kettle sang. Lily laughed at something Theo said. And Nora Quinn, who used to be famous and then used to be invisible and was now simply at home, turned from the window and went to pour the tea. The quietest people are not waiting to be seen. They are too busy making the thing. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay with me. There's another one next week about someone else the world looked straight through. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the person nobody thought to look at? I read every one. Thank you for being here.